Welcome back. All right, so in watching all the hockey that I do, and there's certain things that stand out, and so I want to do a list of the things that have stood out to me so far in these playoffs before we get into game two of round two for two series tonight. So first off, the first thing that has to be discussed is that home ice advantage. All season you play for home ice advantage. But what we've noticed throughout the season is road teams were doing pretty well. That has continued into the playoffs. We have seen thus far road teams winning at a rate we've never seen in the National Hockey League. And I think that that's both. I mean, it's a good thing in that it adds an air of unpredictability. I do feel kind of bad for fans who are paying the amount of money you have to pay for playoff tickets just to watch your team lose. So you watch them go out on the road and you're like, man, they look so good. I can't wait to go and support them at home. And then they come home and you're like, this isn't the same team. These results are quite different. And so it has to be on some level frustrating, right? Because you paid all that money for the tickets, and in the end, well, the result didn't go the way you wanted it to. And so you get to go home and watch them win on the road again. So whether or not this continues throughout the playoffs, we shall see in the two series that are playing tonight. It has been a thing. The other two series last night, less of a thing. So we'll see if it continues. Which brings me to the next one, which is Parody. Now, it wasn't all upsets, right? You have two huge upsets that really threw off brackets. People had taken Colorado to win the Cup. People had taken Boston to win the Cup. Some people may have taken Tampa to win the Cup. And all three of those teams are out. Also, the Rangers being out, they were considered a pretty strong contending team at some points this year as well. And so, Parody's out there, and it's a thing. And I think the fact that Toronto gets out of the first round, New Jersey gets out of the first round, there's, and I'll come back to this, the changes that have gone on with the teams that missed and the teams that got eliminated. But basically, it adds that air of teams being close, series being close, and we saw a lot of series go to 6 or 7 games. In fact, other than one series, all of them went to 6 or 7 games. And I think that just makes for better hockey. It makes for more exciting results. And we've had a decent amount of overtimes. Not too many and not too long, but we've had a decent amount of overtimes to decide things as well. So parity is alive and well in this NHL. Remember the trade deadline? Remember when Seattle were declared losers because they didn't fix their goaltending problem, because they didn't go out and fix things? And I have said this is why I don't talk about trade deadline winners and losers. Because the teams that we figure, well, they did really well, and the other ones we figure, well, they didn't do anything, or they didn't do well. Very often, once the playoffs get rolling, things don't go the way that we expect them to. Where we might say this team really built themselves up at the deadline, that was great, and then it just doesn't work in the playoffs, and vice versa. Seattle was declared trade deadline losers everywhere, and I didn't understand why. Because they were in a good spot to make the playoffs. It was obvious they were going to make it. There was no pressure on them. They didn't have to go out and get, loaded up at the deadline in order to compete for the Stanley Cup. They were already in the playoffs. So, I mean, if they had been sitting 4 or 5 points outside of the playoffs and there was a route for them to get in and they didn't take it, then sure, I could understand the frustration and the criticism, but I didn't understand it then, and it hasn't aged well. Basically, trade deadline losers. Remember the winners, too, were Boston because they got Orlov and Hathaway, and what a great move that was. And then they're out in the first round. And so, yeah, the trade deadline, again, this year shows why I don't do the winners, losers thing. I just say, yeah, I liked what these teams did. We'll see if it works. It's as close as I get. And number 4 is also attached to number 2. Out with the old guard. So right now, the Carolina Hurricanes are the most recent Stanley Cup winners still going in this tournament. They last won it in 2006. New Jersey, 2003. Toronto, of course, we know was 1967. You've also got Dallas, 1999. And then you've got Seattle's never won it, obviously. Vegas hasn't won it, obviously. Like, there really is a good chance that we'll see either a brand new team that hasn't won it before win it, or somebody who hasn't won it in a long time winning it. So I think this makes for more interesting playoffs. I think makes for more fun to watch. And we shall see who ends up getting to hold up that Stanley Cup. Could Florida win their first ever Stanley Cup? Who's going to end up ending a long drought or just ending a drought that's been there since they entered the NHL? And again, if the NHL got what I think would be the most profitable, I think the most profitable final, because this is a question too. I think having Toronto in the finals would mean just absolutely ridiculous amounts of money for the NHL with advertising revenues from Canada, or at the very least, advertising revenues for Rogers, which would then justify their contract with the NHL. But yeah, we've seen the old guard go. Now they may come back next year. Tampa Bay could roar back. Boston could with the right moves end up in a position to go for revenge from what happened this year. But it does feel like it's a changing of the guard, and it's time. Like Pittsburgh, Washington out of the playoffs, it's time for that change. Officiating. Every year we talk about officiating, and it feels like this year it's gotten louder, if that's possible. So, like every game, and it doesn't matter who wins, who loses, and it doesn't matter how lopsided the game is. As soon as we start discussing the game, it's, did you see those missed calls? Did you see those calls that were made? Those are ridiculous. Those are terrible. Those were awful. Did you see those ones that they didn't call? Those, they should have called those. And it really does get louder and louder and louder during the playoffs. And it feels like in this day and age of social media that it's much louder than it ever was before. And I can't imagine for referees where every single potentially missed call, gets thrown back at them. And this is, I think, part of the reason why the NHL doesn't do media availability with officials. And I don't think the NHL wants the actual visual out there of a guy like Wes McCauley, Graham Skilleter sitting there and going, yeah, no, I flat out missed that one. Whoops. I don't think they want that. So I think that's part of the reason why we don't see officials meeting with media or having any kind of availability after the game. You do not want an official saying, yeah, I missed that. Whoops. Because then you don't want a situation where the coach is like, yeah, so you missed that the last time you were refereeing a game with my team, and the referee goes, yeah, and then you got to have that makeup call. You just don't want it. There's a slippery slope there. I understand why people get mad about the officiating. I try my best not to weigh in on that too much when I do recaps and whatnot. But I get it. But at the same time, missed calls have been a thing as long as I've watched hockey, and there's going to always be those missed calls. See people saying, well, if AI can't be trained for, there's too many variables when it comes to penalties that it kind of has to be a human being who's making that decision. So, I don't think those discussions are going to calm down anytime soon. Coaches get second guessed, and this again is something that's definitely been a thing in the NHL and in hockey and in sports, really. But it feels like, again, in this day and age, when we have the stats, especially the advanced stats, we can look at it and we go, analytically, these players are poor. Analytically, these players are great. Therefore, the coach is misusing these players. I've discussed this before, and it's definitely worthy of a video all in and of itself. But some of the analytic stuff, while it's great, I don't like to look at it in a vacuum. I like to look at it in the bigger picture, and there are some bigger picture items with things analytically. But it does leave us as fans saying, well, that coach made the wrong decision, so therefore he should be gone. And it can happen from one game to the next, where and I think Lindy Ruff might be the best example of this, where fire Lindy, sorry Lindy, depends on the period, depends on the game. I think there are New Jersey fans who are not sold on him as the coach at all, and yet they want to see the team succeed. They understand that the team being in the second round means Lindy Ruff's probably not going anywhere. But still, when New Jersey has a bad game, it might be a good time to fire Lindy. So that's definitely conversations out there. I just use him as an example. He is definitely not the only one. Scoring has stayed up, and part of the reason being fantastic power plays. So Edmonton went into last night's game with a power play of 56.7%, something ridiculous. And then they went 2 for 3 on the power play. So they got 2 goals 5-on-5, and the discussion's out there again about their issues with scoring 5-on-5 after a game where they had 4 goals. So the scoring has stayed up. I think that's good for the NHL. I definitely think that fans find games more entertaining with the higher scoring. I know there are fans who don't. I know there are fans who love the low-scoring chess match types with tons of hitting, a la late 90s, early 2000s. But in general, that was an era that didn't provide a lot of highlight reel moves, and just it was a tough era to get excited about. From what, and again, I'm just saying that personally, as a fan who watched hockey back then. The offense was so stifled that you could turn a game off. I quite often had, I could turn a game on, watch, oh, it's 2-0. All right, then you could turn that game off for like an hour and come back and go, well, now it's 2-1, so. Or it's still 2-0. Yeah, they've got it. So you didn't really have to pay attention. Now it could be a 2-0 lead to turn the game off for 5 minutes and go back, and it's 4-2 for the other team. So yeah, this is a completely different league, and I think that it makes it just more exciting. Fans want the excitement. Top goalies. So this is an interesting one too, and I do intend to make a video at some point on this because I think this is interesting. Whereas the individual winners of awards in June are seemingly very rarely from teams that win the Stanley Cup. It just feels like this year we've seen a lot of the top goalies are out. Vasilevsky, out. Hellebuck is out. And of course, Shesterkin is out. Ullmark, who, probably banged up, out. And so there's a lot of the top goalies that are already out. And so the teams that are still in this, it feels like all of them have had some kind of a goaltending question at some point this year. Or goaltending injuries forcing different moves to be made. And so this is a really hard to handicap playoff from this point because it doesn't feel like any one team has a leg up on the other through their goaltending. And I would imagine we'll see the discussion again about how much money you want to put into your goaltending. How important is it to have a top-notch goaltender? And I am keeping in mind here that Bobrovsky's still in these playoffs. He has been a top goaltender in the NHL. He can be and is paid like one of the top goalies in the league. So I'm not saying that they're all out necessarily, but probably your top Vezina guys are out now. And what you're left with is goaltending where there's a question mark of some sort on basically every team I think that's great. And even Dallas with Ottinger. Ottinger's young. He has inconsistency in his game. So while I don't think they would go to Wedgwood under any circumstance, Ottinger, he's still young. He still makes mistakes. And of course, with Seattle, with Grubauer, it's been fantastic, but it hasn't been that way all year, right? There have been points where there were questions asked about Grubauer, where it looked like Martin Jones was the starter, and now here we are with Grubauer in the playoffs. So, yeah. Our ratings are up, so the ratings for the first round of this year's playoffs, the highest for TBS and ESPN that they've had, and that's great. It's great to see the ratings up per game around the National Hockey League, because that's the whole point of being back on ESPN. And getting ESPN to take it more seriously is important too. So like, for instance, Snoop Dogg being on ESPN, being interviewed about his interest in the Ottawa Senators. I think that's key. I think it's key, and they definitely gave that, some serious treatment, and they talked about it, and it was good discussion there of what he feels like it would do if he bought the Sens. And it does feel like the NHL is going to be more profitable, more visible in the U.S., and this is all good things for those of you who want to see the salary cap go up and want to see more liberal player movement around the NHL. Really, the cap has to go up for us to get more liberal movement of players around the NHL. And I wanted to close out with this because it is a discussion point, the digital ads. And it's not just the ads, it's the overlays. So before the playoffs started, I saw complaints about how the Stanley Cup playoffs, which is normally painted on the ice every year, it's been a tradition going back to, I want to say it started in the 80s. Because I remember it, I want to say in the mid-80s, they started putting Stanley Cup playoffs on the ice. I'm not sure on the exact date, and it may predate that. But it was always great. When you get to that first playoff game and you see that painted on the ice, be like, all right, this is for real. Now, they do digitally display that at times during the games, but not very often. And clearly the ads on the ice are what they are, but it is distracting. And so they have digital ads, they have overlays. I even saw somebody had photoshopped up a ridiculousness showing like everything labeled, boards, ice, net, everything. Just here, here's what the NHL envisions the future being. And it's not that far off. Like when a power play starts and everybody has their name over themselves, I'm thinking, well, what if this is, and I've said this before, if the puck having a tail, and if everybody being labeled when they're on the ice is such a big deal, why don't they do it the whole game? And if they're only going to do it for the power play, why? Because then it's even more distracting than if you had it the entire game. And I find it distracting anyways. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I would love to have the ability to subscribe to a model where I don't have to see digital ads, where I don't have to see all the labels of everybody, where I don't have to see the puck tails, any of it, where I can just watch. I know this sounds weird. I watch hockey to watch hockey because I want to watch a hockey game. And they have every right to make whatever advertising money they want to make, however they want to make it. That's absolutely in their best benefit, to their best efforts. It is important for them to do that. This part of the business model is finding a way to get those advertising dollars. And I know they're making good money because they're quite happy about the digital ads. And when you ask, Bettman said when asked about the digital ads that everybody liked them. Basically, like they took a poll that nobody ever saw that they liked them, and I'm sure advertisers were the ones they took the poll with. Oh yeah, that was with the puck going around the boards like that and distracting everybody's eyeballs while the goal's going in. That was perfect. Way more attention on me than on the play. But when he basically said if you're watching the digital ads, well, you're not watching the game. You are though. I'm trying to remember which game it was a couple weeks ago. I'm sure somebody will fill me in because it was weird. I want to say it was a Boston game, but there was a game where the entire camera went dark. So everybody on the ice looked like the lights had kind of gone out, but the digital board ads were still a bright white. And I said out loud, "Oh God, is this the future? Oh no." And I know it's not the future, and I was kidding, but it was really, and again, it takes you out of that moment. So when players skate into the boards to check each other, and they're disappearing into the boards because they have a white jersey on and it's white, it is something. And as Dallas Aiken said last night on Sportsnet, which I thought was interesting, and now I'm going to be watching games looking for it, is that 80% of the game takes place within three feet of the boards. So there's not much in the middle of the ice, which makes sense. How many recaps have I done where I've said they keep them to the outside? The play is kept to the outside. They're blocking off the middle of the ice. But because the play is always along the boards, we are always going to be watching those digital board ads. So the idea that you can uncouple the really random and sometimes distracting ads on the boards, I don't see how you can when the play is almost always along the boards and in the corners, where it can be really, basically players just disappear. Just their torso or their head disappears, and we're supposed to say, that's okay. Yeah, his torso disappeared, but I'm sure he's still there, because I'm not distracted at all. But anyway, because it to me, it looks like old EA Sports glitches. There were EA glitches. There were, which game? I'm trying to remember. I think there was multiple EA games where your stick would go through the boards. So I'd be checking down the screen and I'd be like, oh, my stick's through the boards. That makes sense. Sure. Yeah. All right. Why not? Why shouldn't it go through the boards? And players would randomly disappear or flicker. You'd get that flicker. Yeah. It feels like the NHL's brought that to the real game. So there we are. But let me know your thoughts. Something that you've noticed these playoffs, or in the case of the ads and the overlays, it just feels like they're even more obnoxious than they were during the regular season. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. The channel passed 277,000 subscribers today. Ridiculous number of people, but hey, like my wife always says, that's a lot of people listening to you talk. She has said that for years, and she's right. At any rate, there you go. Thank you guys again for your support. I will talk to you guys soon enough.